Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lesson, we're going to do something we haven't done before, which is ironically to do something we already did. We already covered the chapter I've selected to discuss in this round, Ecclesiastes 1. This was one of my first 10, and even though I've known what I'm talking about even before I started doing these things, I was not adept at the art of communication, which I taught myself over a passage of time and even more directly through the consistent practice of that in time. And I've learned things just from the experience of doing videos that have made me a more polished communicator. So you can type that one in the end, but I'd stay here if you're here now, because this one's going to be a world's away better from that one. And the way I want to open this one up is by a biographical background of Solomon. Solomon was the son of David and the designated heir to his throne. He was also the son of Bathsheba, the adulterous liaison that David sort of succumbed to in his moment of weakness. And even though their first child died as a consequence of David's sin, they would have one son who would be conceived, and he would be the designated heir. He ascends to the throne at the age of 19 years old, and in response to offering sacrifices, he is visited in a dream at Gibeon by God himself, who gives him a blank slate. He can ask anything he wants, and this really reveals his character, because he's 19 years old and he has this he's inexperienced. He has this monumental task of leading and shepherding not only any nation, but the nation of the Almighty Maker, the covenant nation of the Almighty Maker, heaven and earth. So he is aware of the fact that it will require wisdom to do so. So he asks for wisdom, and because he did not ask for the death of his enemies or prosperity or long life, he gives them all of these, the final of which is contingent on his obedience, but the other two are unconditional. So he spent much of his life certainly a more cosmopolitan king than his father David. He had grown up at the palace, whereas his father had ascended from the sheep pen to the throne. So he was, and he really expanded the United Nation of Israel's international commercial contacts, and he much of what he did, the buildings he made, the temple, the palace, the forts, were products and manifestation of this unprecedented and unduplicated wisdom. And he also wrote 3 books, those being Song of Solomon, generally attributed to his earlier years, the Book of Proverbs, generally attributed to his middle years, and the Book of Ecclesiastes right here, which are dedicated to his mature musings. So these are the most mature reflections, and they are arranged as one man. It's really only one person speaking, and he's giving his musings about life. And so he had devoted much of his life. He had amassed a great fortune and had such prestige and even wisdom, but he comes to, near the twilight of his life, he comes to question it all. What good has this done me? And he ultimately refutes pleasure or riches or even wisdom itself as the ultimate source of satisfaction. Wisdom apart from God is going to be an empty life, of which he comments on extensively beginning in the first chapter. So the opening verse reads, "The words of Quoleth, son of David, king in Jerusalem." Quoleth is generally translated as preacher or teacher. More literally in the Hebrew original, it is one who calls out or gathers together an assembly. So the Greek translation of Quoleth is Ecclesiastes. That's the name we know it as, but in the Hebrew Bible it would have been considered the Book of Quoleth. But Ecclesiastes has the same meaning as or as near a meaning, near parallel as any word in the Greek language to the Hebrew original. And the son of David, he doesn't identify himself by name, but this being a work of profound wisdom, there's really only one candidate who could possibly even conceive the profundities and the perplexities and the paradoxes of life and the ironies thereof that he expounds upon throughout this discourse. "Futility, futility, says Quoleth. Futility, all is futile. Now, that word futility, alternately translated as vain or meaningless, the Hebrew original is habar, which translates as to vapor or mist. Now, in the 78 times that word appears throughout the Old Testament, on only 3 occasions is it speaking of the literal or physical mist. Elsewhere, it is used to describe this state of incomprehensibility, incompleteness, vanity, meaningless, or futility. And but he comments more on that as we progress. We're going to reason why he says that all is futile, because he had literally experienced everything one could want or need or desire, yet he comes to the conclusion that everything he has and everything he is in himself is all vanity. The secret, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, is the meaning of life can only be found in the one who not only gives life, but gives life's meaning. Our purpose can only come from one whose purpose is greater than ours. Our value can only come from one whose value is exceedingly greater than ours. So the secret to living a purpose-filled life is to be God-oriented and God-centered. What does man gain from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Now, Solomon had by this time spent several decades accumulating vast treasures of wealth, but he's beginning to question it all because he's aware of the fact that he's not going to be around to enjoy it for very much longer. And he also questions the worthiness of his son, and his successor, we read, was not quite the same caliber of man that he was. He was rash and foolish, whereas Solomon was studied and wise. A generation passes away, and a generation comes, but the earth stands forever. So these are the cycles of life and death within the earth. So what we have here is he expounds on patterns of change within structures of permanence. So the earth remains forever or stands forever, but the life in those who inhabit the earth, they come and go, generations and in cycles of consisting of being born and then dying eventually and inevitably. So the earth is longer than clearly not only any species, but any individual inhabitant who's ever inhabited it. The sun also rises, and the sun goes, and hurries back to the place where it arose. Sun rises from the east and sets in the west, I believe. So this is a regular pattern and cycle. Were it not so, the earth and the weather and the days as we know them would not be, and the likelihood is that if the sun did not evenly distribute itself across the earth, at least one half of it would be barren, and there could be no life. The amount of energy that the sun exerts on this planet in a single second is greater than all the accumulated some energies of humankind from the pyramids to the skyscrapers, so we literally could not exist without it. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea never overflows. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. So a similar pattern exists with rivers. They stream and overflow and move in one direction, but they all go back to the same cycle. So again, there's that pattern of change within the overall structure of permanence. And this actually incidentally preempts the pre-Socratic philosophers who would come in ancient Greece some 400 years after them. The nature or the emphasis of the pre-Socratics, the ones who came before Socrates, was metaphysical. So the practitioners and avatars of what came to be known as philosophy after Plato coined the term, there was one, Heraclitus, who argued that change is the only stable thing or permanent thing in the earth, but Parmenides argued that permanence is the defining character of the earth, and much of that dichotomy would be bridged by Plato, the great synthesizer. But what we witness here is Solomon speaking similarly of the patterns that neither of them are incorrect, they're just in themselves incomplete. There are patterns of change, but they all exist within a stable continuum of stability and permanence. All matters are wearisome. No one is able to speak of it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. So our sensory engagers and centers, the eye, you can see so much, but it's never going to be satisfied. Our eyes kind of lust for beauty, and will seek it in sometimes illicit places. And the ear, you can fill the music with so much, the ear with so much music in a lifetime, but the music is not bound and not guaranteed to last forever. So finding supreme satisfaction in that which is pleasing to the senses is clearly a meaningless, purposeless life that's not going to end well or accomplish anything. So remember, his quest and his pursuit is to identify the meaning of life. That's what this book is all about. And here, we earlier heard him spoke of as a scientist. Now, the wind, I neglected to mention also in verse 6, has a New Testament parallel in John 3:8, when Savior instructs the inquiring Pharisee Nicodemus that the movements of the Spirit are comparable to the wind, and that no one can control it or predict it or anything along those lines. But now in the 9th verse we read, "What has been is what shall be. What has been done is what shall be done. And there is none new under the sun." So in spite of all this change, all this constant flux of just this continuum of change, there's really nothing new, because nothing can be done that has not already been done before, both in nature and in human history, although we from a modern lens may be inclined to disagree. I think Aristotle said something similar about there is nothing new that his present generation had accomplished that hadn't already been accomplished, but he didn't have the full panoramic view of history that we moderns have. History was in its infancy, fathered by someone who came not long before him by the name of Heraclitus, father of history. "Is there a matter of which it is said, 'See, this is new'? It was already here long ago." So we already answered the question in anticipation of asking it. He already established that nothing is new under the sun. Nothing can be new. There's nothing original or unprecedented or unduplicatable, because what is coming to pass has come to pass and will come to pass again. "There is no remembrance of former ones, nor is there any remembrance of those who are to come by those who come later on." So critical scholars have accused Solomon of promoting the worldview of secular agnosticism in here, and there is some truth in their criticism, although Solomon does find out the meaning of life. It's in obedience to the command, as he concludes the whole matter in 12:13. But he also writes from the vantage point implicit in this passage as if there was no resurrection. Now, the resurrection became a cardinal doctrine of Orthodox Judaism. There are several places throughout the Old Testament which give expression to it, including from his own father in Psalm 16, also Job 19 and Daniel 12:3. The word resurrection never appears in the Old Testament, but the concept is undeniably implicit throughout. But Solomon is writing from the vantage point as if this life is all that there is, and if this life was all there is, and we could no longer hold on to it or have life after, then it would be meaningless. So we can understand the plight of his dilemma. We once lived as if there was no resurrection, or at least I did. I wasn't born a Christian. I became born again. But Quoleth was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So Solomon's reign can be marked as a golden age of prosperity and influence and just this wealth and cultural achievement in the land of Israel during this really flickering sunshine of Israel's history. All was as well as it would ever be. They would never again be more influential or more dominant, because after Solomon their kingdom kind of divided, and that made them a force that wasn't quite the same thing that could be reckoned with when they were united. But his reign does mark a blissful interlude in Israel's history. "And I applied my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that has been done under the heavens. This evil task Elohim has given to the sons of man, to be humbled by it." So he is humbled by his quest to wisdom. Now, his wisdom had served him in well thus far. He was the author of some 3,000 proverbs. 678 are contained in the book by that name. But here he's the pursuit of his wisdom is something more complex and beyond its capacity to comprehend all that has been under the sun of the heaven, and this is an evil task that Elohim has given to the sons of men to be humbled by it. So we come away from this quest knowing that we don't have all the answers, and we are humbled by our own ignorance, but we grow in faith to the one with whom we have faith in has all the answers. He is an omniscient being. That's the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence. So we are finite creatures made in his image. We cannot duplicate his capacities in any way, shape, or measure, but we must give or develop the capacities he does give to us in all things and in all ways. Whatever we do, whatever we say, whatever we are, do it for the glory of God. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and see, all was futile and feeding on wind. So the word all appears twice in this verse. It's one of the three-letter words I really pay attention and pop out to me because they entail a universality of elements. So he's claiming to have observed everything that can take place under the sun. That's a hyperbolic statement. No one in one lifetime can observe everything that's even under their sun, let alone the sun. But he comes to the conclusion that everything on earth and every aspect of life as he knows it on earth is vanity. But remember, he's writing from the vantage point which if not outright denies the resurrection, considers it something too good to be true. The crook and feeding on wind, vanity, is likened to wind or vapor because the wind we read in the fourth verse. Well, it doesn't really matter. It's somewhere in the first 5, but it goes in cycles. It can't be controlled and predicted, so we have about as much chance of discerning or deciphering the meaning of life as we do to accurately predict and portend the weather as it comes. The crooked could not be straightened, and what is lacking could not be counted. So these are perplexities and dilemmas. That which is crooked needs to be straightened, but that which is crooked often is unwilling or unable to be straightened. And what is lacking could not be counted. That means that what he doesn't have is beyond his measure. There's an infinite gap between what he knows and what he wants to know, and he's just acknowledging that his lack of knowledge and wisdom in itself is incompetent to give life meaning unless it is exercised in a God-oriented and God-centered manner. So I spoke to my heart, saying, See, I have attained greatness, and I've gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. And my heart has seen much wisdom and knowledge. So this isn't bragging. He's simply telling the truth. He was the most prestigious king in Israel's history, and he was the wisest and the richest king who quite possibly ever lived. Certainly one of the trillionaire rulers. The science of measuring the modern sum of money is not an exact one, but archaeological evidence suggests that the accounts of the influx of gold that traveled into his city were not exaggerated, so historians can reliably estimate his personal wealth as being in the range of a multi-trillionaire. And I applied my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I knew that this too is feeding on the wind. So he did not limit his heart or his intellectual activity to know wisdom alone, but he also is kind of curious about madness and folly. Maybe they know something that the wise don't, that the wise are lacking, because I'm as wise as they come, no exaggeration, it's a truthful statement, and I can't find the meaning of life. Why don't I seek out these people? And of course, the statement of fools is that where it is where ignorance is bliss, to be wise is folly, but that is not a reliable long-term investment or strategy for life. We should try and figure out as much as we can about these great perplexing questions, and we have a lifetime to do so. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases in suffering. So wisdom will not bring the satisfaction that Solomon craves. Wisdom, with his increase of wisdom and understanding, one becomes more aware of the imperfections literally all around them, and this can be depressing and discouraging. And a lot of wise people are prone to despair, and that's certainly what we witness Solomon expressing here. But wisdom is, it's not a constant high. You're going to notice things you weren't true or weren't real or didn't exist. But once you embrace that, that is the wise thing to do. And the suffering must precede the splendor. So if we hope to attain the answers, the great unanswered questions which we seek, we must be willing and prepared to suffer in the course thereof. So I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.